Ride With Me by Thomas B. Costain. Copyright 1944 by Thomas B. Costain. Read by Richard Matthews. Introduction. I began this story with the sole intent of relating in fiction form the exploits of an unusual soldier who has been allowed to drop out of sight. As the work progressed, however, the glamour and excitement of the Napoleonic period took possession of me, and I found myself obsessed with a desire to get down on paper a detailed picture of those exciting days, particularly as I began to realize that the situation which existed then has been reproduced today with amazing faithfulness in even the smallest matters. That I yielded to the impulse is evident in the size of this volume, for which I apologize, being completely aware that I have succeeded in capturing no more than a fleeting glimpse of those most colorful and prophetic times. Despite the liberties I have taken with my readers, carrying them from England to the Iberian Peninsula, then back again to England, only to pick them up bodily and transport them to Russia for a view of the tragic business of the Moscow retreat, finally setting them down in France after the 100 Days to watch the closing scenes of the Bonapartist saga, I have not succeeded in telling the whole story of Sir Robert Wilson. That extraordinary fellow had many adventures which I have had to pass over. It was particularly hard to refrain from telling of the part he played in the feud between George IV and his frowsy German queen, but that episode, one of the most spectacular of all, lies far outside the bounds of my story. I am sure that all who ride with Robert Thomas Wilson in these pages will agree that he was born in the wrong period. He had so many qualities, counted faults at the start of the 19th century, which would have been virtues in the days when knights obeyed only the dictates of honour, and followed unquestioningly when the finger of adventure beckoned. Lack of discipline accounted for all the black marks on his record, but it may be recalled that it was against Charlemagne's orders that the stout Roland turned at bay in the valley of Roncesvalles to provide chivalry with its brightest annal. Had Wilson lived in the Middle Ages, he also would have inspired great legends. Instead, he was born into the England of the last Georges, where he was most completely out of place. He was treated, with some justice no doubt, like a disobedient schoolboy. It may very well be, however, that it was not Wilson who was at fault so much as the times in which he lived. The story I have set down is, of course, a compound of fact and fiction. Wilson did all the remarkable things with which he is credited, although it has been necessary to summon imagination for the fictional embroidery of them. Many other real characters appear at intervals in the pages which follow: Wellington, Dumouriez, Horne Tooke, Kutuzov, Walter Scott, the Lavalettes, Michael Bruce, Captain Healy Hutchison, La Belle Îlotte. The main characters are all purely fictional, as are the situations of the story, except as they concern the participation of the historical characters. I hasten to explain that the newspaper called The Tablet never existed. I have taken the liberty of borrowing some details from the history of the London Times, particularly in the sending out of the first war correspondent and the introduction of power presses, but the troubles and bickerings of the Ellerys are purely imaginary, and in no single respect a reflection of the lives of the members of the Walter family who owned the Times. Many books were read or consulted for the background of the story, between 400 and 500 to be more exact, and so a complete bibliography would serve no purpose save to use up valuable space. Instead, I wish to put on record my debt to a few writers whose skilful winnowing of pure gold from the dross of the period has been particularly helpful to me. Giovanni Costigan, Sir Robert Wilson, A Soldier of Fortune; Carola Oman, Napoleon at the Channel; Comtesse de Boigne, Memoirs; August Ludolf Friedrich Schaumann, On the Road with Wellington; Robert Blakeney, A Boy in the Peninsular War; Marianne Bailey, Lisbon; Sir Robert Wilson, The French Invasion of Russia. Book 1. England. Chapter 1. Francis Ellery leaned against the side of a bus, which apparently had abandoned the idea of going any further in the fog. He was tired, and his stiff knee was hurting him abominably. It was with a deep sense of relief that he heard the sharp voice of Sergeant Cripps, far ahead, give the order for them to break up and get home as best they could. Borcher, the hatter, who had marched with him at the end of the squad, adjusted his scratch wig with blue fingers, and then buttoned his tunic tightly over the yellow waistcoat which proclaimed his liberal tendencies. "What are you down for tonight, Ellery?" he asked. "Committee for London Defence. And you, Borcher?" The hatter snorted as he hobbled off aggrievedly into the dense mist. "Waterworks patrol, but I'll never get there in this fog. A lot of blasted nonsense anyway. This damned Corsican certainly plays hob with our lives."
"Monsieur," said a pleasant feminine voice from above, "is it possible you can tell us where we are?"
Ellery looked up and was able to make out that all the upper seats on the bus were occupied by people in evening clothes. French, he thought. Many times he had seen émigrés starting off like this for dinner, and unconcernedly taking the cheapest way of getting there. A male voice said in French, "Allow me to attend to this, Gabriel, if you please," adding in slow and halting English, "You in the blue coat, where is Cannon Square?" Looking up at the row of expectant heads, Frank answered, "Cannon Square is a good quarter-mile from here. I'm afraid you'll have to chance the rest of the way on foot. The bus will never get you there now." The masculine voice lapsed into French again. "This filthy London, these stupid English. Tonight there will be a soft haze over Paris, and people will be riding in open carriages to dinner or the opera. I can't stand to live among these savages any longer. I think I shall cut my throat tonight and be done with it." He leaned over the rail and called down brusquely in English, "A shilling, my man, to show us the way." Frank laughed. "As it happens, I'm going in your direction, and I'll be glad to guide you without any fee, handsome though your offer is." He paused, and then added in French, "I forgive you, monsieur, for not finding London to your liking on a night like this, but may I point out that many thousands of exiles from your gentle France have found it a safe and friendly sanctuary." He heard the pleasant feminine voice expostulating in a low tone,
"Jules, will you never learn? Must you always say such things? One can tell from his voice that he's a gentleman."
"I mean it," said the man impatiently. "I shall cut my throat tonight." Through the open door of a tavern, a hoarse voice said, "You won't see your end afore you're up in face in half an hour." This was no exaggeration. Already the fog was settling down like a damp blanket, with blinding, choking insistence, blotting out the buildings, filling every crevice, turning the lights from shop windows into faint yellow smudges against the pervading grey. Voices heard at a distance of more than a dozen feet seemed to issue from the air with a suggestion of ventriloquism. It was a lucky thing, Frank said to himself, that he knew every foot of this part of London. The French party was climbing down the steps of the bus with much talk and laughter. He wondered that they could be so gay. It was the talk of London that most of them had been forced to accept any form of menial work which offered, and that they subsisted on almost nothing. This was largely hearsay, however, for the refugee colony kept exclusively to themselves and had little to do with their English neighbours. The owner of the pleasant voice proved to be a young girl with a worn cashmere shawl around her shoulders. The rest were shadowy figures to him, even when they had reached the ground and stood about in an expectant group. But somehow he could see her as clearly as though she were on the floor of a ballroom with candles by the 100. She was wearing a Mary Queen of Scots cap, and under its tartan band her reddish-brown hair curled closely. Her face was a slender oval, in which her dark and lively eyes seemed unusually large. He could see that her feet, skirts were being worn much shorter than ever before this season, were very trim in a fragile pair of velvet slippers, and that the hand clasping the shawl around her neck was small and white. She was so lovely, in fact, that he had a tendency to stammer when he addressed her. "If you can spare the time, mademoiselle, I will try to find sedan chairs for you and your friends." The man who had offered him the shilling, and who had followed immediately after her down the steps, did not favour this idea. Frank saw that he was tall and quite handsomely attired in lavender coat, with a flowing cravat and a well-powdered wig. "We're late as it is, Gaby," said the dandy. "The Comtesse will think we're not coming, and will be having a perfect tantrum." The girl nodded, and then said to the Englishman, "I think we shall have to walk, monsieur. Will you be so very kind as to show us the way, then?" Frank bowed. "I know this section quite well, but it will be necessary to proceed with the greatest caution. I'm going to walk close to the building so I can feel my way along. You had better follow in single file, and I suggest you join hands. It's very easy to become separated in a fog like this." The dandy muttered to himself in French, "What an abominable situation!" But the girl said in gay tones, "I'll follow after you, monsieur, and I shall hold on to your coat-tails.
I hope you won't think it too undignified, but we can't afford to lose.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?